Have you ever wondered how true craftsmen are able to do such precise work? I'm talking about wooden parts that fit together like they glue that way and finished projects that drop jaws. Sure, you could spend thousands on high-end machinery. That is going to help. But the real secret, used by the finest woodworkers in the world, is this simple hunk of wood. You can even make one of these yourself. It's called a shooting board, and it can change everything for you. I'm not kidding. If you learn to use one of these along with a simple hand plane, your work will improve by leaps and bounds, even if your table saw is somewhat lacking. You don't have to be rich to be a fine woodworker. And in this video, I'll show you the secrets of the shooting board and why it's so valuable, even if you don't typically use hand tools. Now, just briefly, a shooting board is a jig that works in conjunction with a hand plane to dress and square up the ends and the edges of work pieces, to fine-tune miter and other angled cuts, or to micro-adjust the length or the width of a project part with a level of precision that simply cannot be matched with any power tool. Now, if you're looking at this hand plane and you're thinking, I don't like planes, so this isn't for me, I urge you to just stick with me for a few more minutes, because what I'm going to show you is so easy to do that you're going to want to dig out the old plane you have in your garage and give this a try. Let's start with making precise crosscuts. I try to keep my table saw well tuned, but as I make a crosscut, even the smallest shift of the board or the tiniest deflection away from the blade can produce an end that's slightly out of square. Maybe it's just a little bit, and so it's good enough for most projects. But for your best work, good enough doesn't have to be good enough, because it's so simple to take that workpiece that you just cut from the table saw over to your shooting board and clean it up with a few quick passes across the end grain. Saw marks, chip out, the tiniest inconsistencies all disappear, and you'll have a board that's perfectly square both on its edges and its end, with a finished surface that doesn't even need sanding. Of course, whether you're using a table saw or a shooting board, it's impossible to get a square end if the reference edge is not straight along its length. A shooting board can take care of that as well. In this case, I'm not so worried about the end being square yet. In fact, if the board is narrow, it would be impossible to reference off the shooting board's fence with that narrow end. My only concern right now is keeping the end of the board against the sole of my plane. So I apply pressure along the opposite edge, following the plane down the length of the board with my hand. This is the easiest way to edge joint a small or even medium-sized workpiece, even for just gluing boards together to make wider panels, because I'm not only making it straight, but the shooting board jig ensures that the edge is also made perfectly square to the face of the board. It eliminates ripples and tool marks that come from a power joiner, and I can safely work with much smaller workpieces than I can on a big power joiner. Now that the reference edge is straight, I can place it against the shooting board's fence, where it will be nice and secure as I square the end, just as I showed you before. Sometimes, though, you may not want the end to be perfectly square. One of the greatest advantages of a shooting board is the ability to precisely fit project parts to the spaces that they have to go into on your project. And sometimes that means tweaking the angle of an end a little bit. A good way to do this is to slip a feeler gauge between the board and the fence as one of the tiniest of shims. This throws the cutting angle off just a little bit, and the end will be slightly out of square. I like to start with a small adjustment and then add my shims to work my way up to the perfect fit. As you make adjustments to the end of your workpiece, the board will obviously start to get a little shorter. So there's a process to using a shooting board to fit your parts effectively. Typically, if I'm working on something that has to be really precise, and I know I'm going to use my shooting board to get that precision, I'll cut my workpiece a little longer than it needs to be at the table saw, and then I'll use the shooting board to fine-tune its size. For example, if I need this project part to be 13 inches long, I'm going to cut it at the table saw to about 13 1/4. Then I'll take it to the shooting board and I'll square up one end. Next, I'll measure 13 inches from that clean end, and I'll mark it with a fine pencil, or better yet, with a knife. I may even skip the measuring, and if possible, I'll hold the project part right on the partially assembled project itself, and then I'll mark it in place so I get it precise as it's going to fit in the project. Now I could try to cut right to that line with the table saw, but as I've already demonstrated, the shooting board will give me a cleaner, more precise cut, and it better allows me to gradually sneak up on the line as I custom fit a part into its spot on the project. So I'll just trim close to my line with the saw, leaving a tiny bit to remove at the shooting board. Then I'll take a couple passes with the plane, I'll check my fit, and if the part is still a little too long or too tight, I can plane more away. Since the plane can remove the tiniest amount while keeping the edge square and free from tool marks, it becomes a lot easier to sneak up on the perfect fit than with any power tool. Now let me show you another little trick that may make you want to use your marking knife more. As your plane gets closer to your knife scribed line, the surface fibers on the waist side of that line start to chip away. That leaves a fine gap between the line and the sole of the plane. It's easy to see as that gap gets narrower with each pass until it just disappears. At that point, you stop planing and you'll find yourself with a perfectly trimmed board every time. One of the problems that comes with cutting end grain, whether it be with a table saw or with a plane, is the chance of chipping out the back corner where the cutter exits the wood. Here's a clever technique to avoid that. I'll flip the board so the finished edge that was against the fence is now the leading edge. Then I'll slightly angle the board away from the fence as I take a few cuts on just the corner. This creates a small chamfer, and as I flip that edge back to the fence, you can see a little gap where that chamfered corner doesn't touch the sole of the plane. If I stop planing my end just as that gap disappears, I'll eliminate the risk of chip out and get a crisp corner every time. That same chamfer idea can be used to check to make sure that your plane iron is parallel to the sole of your plane. That's something that's important for your shooting board to work correctly. After taking a few passes on the corner as before, I look at the end grain. If the transition between the angles is straight across the end, the blade's properly adjusted. If not, use the plane's lateral adjustment lever that's beneath the iron. Now, why doesn't the plane cut into the shooting board itself as it does the workpiece lying on top? Well, if you look at the sole of your plane, you'll notice that there's a little cast iron still on each side of the mouth opening where the blade sticks through. That part of the sole rides against the edge of the shooting board's platform. So while you may shave a little bit off that edge in the first pass or two of a new shooting board due to the cutting edge of the blade protruding a tiny bit past the sole, once that bit of cast iron touches the edge of that platform, it's no longer going to be able to cut into it. All that it'll be able to cut is the workpiece that you're pressing against the sole of the plane. You can build your own shooting board if you like, but I get mine from Rob Kosman. He's a fine woodworker in Canada. He and his family make these by hand and then they sell them on their website. There are 4 different sizes, from compact and convenient for small work with a block plane to medium and large for regular project parts. There's even one for fine-tuning 45-degree miters. If I were to choose just one, I think it would be the medium 18-inch version, but it's hard to choose because they all have a place on my bench. Rob uses a special lamination process that prevents the glue from creating a slight bow in the base panel. It's really clever and it ensures a flatter, better functioning shooting board. But he also has some free videos that show you how to do this yourself if you just want to use some scraps that you may already have on hand. I'll link to all that below this video. The finest woodworkers use shooting boards for pretty much every project, even if they're primarily working with power tools. They are such versatile and important tools. It's a real shame more woodworkers don't take advantage of them. I hope this video helps you consider the possibilities because a shooting board can really up your woodworking game. Now here's something else that'll make a difference in your shop. Ridge Carbide is the best kept secret in woodworking. I kid you not, their saw blades are second to none, both in quality and performance, and they're less expensive than the other ultra premium brands. Do yourself a favor, use the link and the discount code below this video. You will never go back to cheap blades again.